Stock. Jennifer is the Education Outreach Coordinator for Cordell Bank National Marine Sanctuary, which is a sanctuary off of our coast, and it's a division of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. In this role, she coordinates all education and outreach for the sanctuary, including creating teacher and student materials, organizing workshops, creating publications. She's also the local ocean DJ for KWMR, West Marin Radio. If you are out in West Marin, when's your show?
First Monday of the month, but it streams online. You don't have to go.
Okay, so go to Google KWMR and you can check out Ocean Currents. Jennifer has been an environmental educator for a couple of decades, having worked not only for Cordell Bank, but also for the Yosemite National Institute, Catalina Island Marine Institute, and the National Park Service. And today she's here to talk about our changing oceans. So please join me in welcoming Jennifer Stock.
Decades. Really, like I've been here for a while, and I have been. So I put together a talk to you today to talk a little bit about our changing ocean. But something I've been reflecting along about recently is just how far we've come in thinking about the ocean and protecting it and other things that are valuable to us and ecosystems. Since we're in such an interesting time right now with a lot of looks at these laws, and realizing that young people like yourselves may not have this idea of how far we have come along, especially in California, and how California has been a leader in not only establishing stewardship for California's ocean and coast, but also our nation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to take a little detour to a recent expedition that I was just on, because I was out on a deep ocean exploration expedition just 2 weeks ago on a boat and exploring 9,000 feet below the sea, and I wanted to share some highlights from that. And then we'll come back and we can ask some questions. So we always have to start with our big blue marble, because this is our planet Earth. Just over a week ago, we were looking to the sky away from the Earth with the eclipse, and it was a really exciting time for science, because so many people were thinking about the solar system and how we know these things and how we know exactly when it's going to happen, the moon and the stars and the sun, and the projection on Earth. And I also thought it was a great time to consider looking back down at Earth, the actual place that we live on, that we depend on to live. And if we look at this image, remind ourselves that our Earth is actually 3/4 ocean. So that means if this whole room represented our Earth, this whole front area here would be the entire planet for which we can live on Earth, and the rest of it would be ocean. So it's the dominant habitat on our planet, which means it has a lot of influence on our life here on Earth, on the land part. It produces about half of the oxygen that you breathe every day. All the phytoplankton does that. It absorbs heat from the sun. It transports heat. It transports moisture. Sometimes it dumps a lot of moisture, like it just did in Houston this week. So it's really the dominant habitat on our planet. And for me, it's something that I've focused my career on because I'm so passionate about it and I love it. And I'm just really excited to share some of the pieces about it with you today. So, starting here locally, the West Coast, California. How many of you are from the West Coast? Raise your hand. All right. How many of you are from the East Coast? Nobody. I was from the East Coast, and when I was a kid and I saw pictures of National Geographic of elephant seals and tide pools, those were like, what? That is so crazy to me, because they don't have those on Long Island, New York, where I grew up. And I thought to myself, I want to see these things someday. I want to get there, that California place. And it's because of the oceanography that we have here that we have such an incredible megafauna like elephant seals and other intertidal organisms. So we're going to do a quick little oceanography 101 to talk to you why this area is so, so special. So this is a map of the Earth, and it's just a reminder that the Earth is not flat. This is just projected so you can see all the ocean basins. There are 4 places on our planet that have these incredibly productive currents. They're called eastern boundary currents. And it's the eastern boundary of an ocean basin where it hits up against a continent. And these 4 places have some of the highest productivity in the ocean, meaning a lot of life, from tiny little things to megafauna like giant whales and sharks and seabirds and big predators. So just 4 places, and that makes up less than 1% of the entire ocean's area, but about 20% of our global seafood catch come from these 4 areas. And that's because there is so much food in these 4 areas. And if you look on the map here, we are smack dab in the California current, which is why we have so much life. This California current ecosystem is super productive because of a process we have called spring upwelling. Has anyone heard of spring upwelling? Well, a quick primer on upwelling is in the springtime, when we start getting longer days of sunlight and we get some warmer, high-pressure systems, we have a lot more wind. And has anyone ever been to the coast in the springtime and like barreled over by the wind and sand coming out of your ears? That is spring upwelling time. And what happens during those spring winds is it pushes the surface waters away from shore because the earth is spinning, so the water gets pushed offshore. And that void is replaced with deep, cold, nutrient-rich water. And those nutrients are from things that have died and have settled down on the seafloor. And so they come right back up to the surface, kind of like compost in a garden. You add fertilizer, and it stimulates growth for the tiniest things in the ocean, the phytoplankton. And the phytoplankton are the base of the food web for all the other organisms, and it just takes off in the springtime. A lot of divers call it pea soup because the water is so green from phytoplankton. So this is kind of a crazy illustration because it shows a ton of arrows, and it also shows you how intricate the ocean is. It's not just one giant mass of water, but there's a lot of movement that's moving around water, moving around temperature, moving around oxygen, and moving around nutrients. And so with this ecosystem, combining with our seafloor, and the different contours on our seafloor, those two combined make this area just right off our coast here one of the most incredible in the world for wildlife and for fisheries. So here's a little picture of phytoplankton magnified. These things are microscopic. You can't see them with your bare eye. You have to look through a microscope. And they're all these different shapes and sizes, and they are photosynthesizers. They're plants. So they use those nutrients that come up, they use the sun's energy to make their energy, and they reproduce a lot. And that's when they become food for some of the things lower on the food chain, like the zooplankton or the animal plankton. And animal plankton might be from larvae, from fishes or invertebrates. There are some zooplankton that spend their entire lives in zooplankton and will never grow past that tiny copepod stage, that thing in the middle there. But again, here we are building up the food web for all the other megafauna that depend on all this food. So we have organisms that settle down on the seafloor on rocky areas, and they filter in all this plankton. There's more mobile animals like fishes and octopuses. And the surface waters are what draw the big predators from afar to eat here for all this food. So we know of several animals that make these incredible migrations to feed here because there's so much food. They leave their home because there isn't enough food there to come feed here. So we have seabirds that come up from Chile and New Zealand. We have leatherback turtles that cross from Indonesia to California to eat. Albatrosses leave their breeding sites in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands to come here to eat. One of the things they do that's really cool is they will come here to eat, then go back to feed their chick, and then come back again. So they'll leave their chick for like weeks at a time. And then another seabird from the Arctic actually comes down at the end of the summer. They spend their winters down here where there's less snow and ice. So this has been a hot spot for a lot of different animals. And so with that in mind, there's a lot of different protections that we have on the coast here. Here's a picture of a blue whale because they're the largest animal on Earth, and this is one of their hot spots for feeding. So something that's been on my mind a lot is that we really do love our coast and ocean. We have a culture in California of caring about the ocean. So this poll here with UCLA shows that 90% of the registered voters in California say the condition of the ocean and the state's beaches is important to them personally. And 57% believing it is very important, one step up. This was done last year, and it crossed inland and coastal populations. It crossed multiple age generations, different diversity of people, and it really is just a testament to how much we care about what happens on our coast and ocean. And so all that care comes into supporting an economy in California because of the things we can do on the ocean. Because of the marine life that we have, the whales that we have, the great places to go sea kayaking or diving, people spend a lot of money in California on these activities. And because of that really rich food web, we have some incredible fisheries that have landed a lot of money here in coastal communities and for the state of California. So we have a lot of investment in helping protect what is giving a lot of money to our state economy, providing jobs for people and for money to keep moving around. And California, you may have heard, is usually leading the way. My mom always says that. She's from New York, and she says, California's always in charge or always in front. And it's true. And so that's going to come up a couple times in this talk today. And actually, California really led the way for a series of nationwide legislation. And sadly, not through a positive incident, but a horrible incident that happened. Has anyone heard about the oil spill of 1969? This was a pivotal event in California. Channel Islands, Santa Barbara region is a beautiful place. People love to dive there, love to go fishing there. A ton of wildlife, seabird rookeries, pinniped rookeries, where sea lions and harbor seals breed. And it's also a place that's very rich in oil. And so the oil industry has platforms both on land, because there's oil there, but also in the ocean. And in 1969, and prior to 1969, there really wasn't a lot of regulation about safety for these platforms and technology and preparing for accidents or incidents. And so about 3 million gallons of crude oil was released, a 35-mile-long slick, and that all landed on the coast of Santa Barbara. And if you lived there, how would you feel? Pretty upset, especially if you're someone that enjoyed the ocean. So this event really got people activated. How can this happen to our homes? How can this happen to the things that we love and treasure? And it really started a massive amount of activism in terms of protecting and getting involved and figuring out how can we better protect the things that we depend on for our livelihoods. So what happened next after 1969 is kind of amazing in terms of what this event brought on for legislation. So a lot of history was made here. Just 1 year later, the Clean Air Act was passed. This is the act that started regulating what we put into the air. Pollutants from vehicles, from industry. There's a picture in the lower left here showing Los Angeles before the Clean Air Act and after the Clean Air Act was implemented, and making huge changes. And sometimes I think, oh God, it feels like we're not making any progress. And I look at a picture like that and I think, what would it look like right now if there was no Clean Air Act? Thinking about that's what it looked like historically. So 1970 we passed that. The Environmental Protection Agency was passed, was created, which was to help regulate the Clean Air and Clean Water Act, which comes next, and keeping an eye on regulations to help the environment. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration was created, which is the agency for ocean and atmospheric sciences, and basically keeping an eye on how we can have safer commerce and help protect people and lives. And then the first Earth Day was created. It feels like Earth Day's been here forever. Well, the first one was actually right after that oil spill in 1970, because people were starting to see how important it was that we start to take care of our natural resources. So Earth Day started in 1970. And then 2 years later, we had more legislation passed. I mean, this is a span of 3 years so far, and this is all really significant legislation. Coastal Zone Management Act passed, and that is all about how we look at developing the coast and how close can buildings be to bodies of water or wetlands or marshlands. The Marine Mammal Protection Act passed. We used to hunt for whales right off our beaches here, all the way up till 1972, when we finally banned whaling and other protections for marine mammals. The Clean Water Act passed in 1972, which looked at regulating what goes into our water. There was a time where rivers were on fire because there were so many chemicals in rivers. So if you think about the changes that we've seen from 1970, 1972 to now, we swim in rivers now. We put our kids in the rivers, we play on them. We won't be able to do that. And then my agency, the Marine Protection Research and Sanctuaries Act passed, which was the act to designate special areas in the ocean to help protect them for future generations. So very much like national parks on land do that, we started to think about special ocean areas, and that's the agency that I work for. I'm going to talk about them a little bit. Then just 4 years later, here, this is a California law and then a national law. The California Coastal Act established the California Coastal Commission. There was a development north of us called Sea Ranch that was looking to cut off access to the coast so that you and I couldn't go to any of those beaches. People did not like that. And so they got involved in the California Coastal Commission was one of the outcomes of that outcry. It's basically promoting access to the coast for everybody. It's all of our beaches. And California has laws about that we can go to all these beaches predominantly. There's a couple that are off limits for various reasons. And then nationally, looking at fisheries, before 1976, everyone was just fishing everything, taking as much as they could. There was no regulation whatsoever. And the Magnuson Fisheries Conservation and Management Act basically started putting fisheries management in the arms of regional councils. So in our area, we have the Pacific Fisheries Management Council. And they manage all the fisheries on the West Coast from Washington all the way to Southern California, and even into a little bit of Idaho, because some of the salmonids go into Idaho. And they regulate our fishing. And that goes out to all our federal waters. For federal, in the United States, is 0 to 200 miles out. So that is a significant piece of legislation that helps set limits and looking at how we can track the catches and monitor their progress as fisheries to sustain them, because this is something that feeds people and makes money for our country. So all of these things happened. And I just want to back up a little bit to the national marine sanctuaries a little bit, and we'll come back to this in a little bit towards the other side. But the National Marine Sanctuary System being established in '72 was 100 years after the designation of our National Park Service. So 100 years prior, we started looking at special places on land to protect, and then 1972 we finally started realizing, wow, we have these special ocean areas too. And so each of these places are areas that either there's some special ecological value or some cultural value, like sunken ships. We have one sanctuary that's in the Great Lakes, so we protect Great Lakes areas too. And there's a series of shipwrecks in those lakes in Michigan. So each of these places have some unique thing about them that are really worth protecting. And here in California, and actually all the way up to Washington, you can see the testament of that California current ecosystem. We have 5 here on the West Coast because it's such a productive zone. So our goal is to protect, promote, and conserve, and in some places restore areas of unique biological or cultural resources, cultural value for future generations, while allowing for compatible uses. So these are places where people can go, we can use. We don't regulate fishing, our Fisheries Management Council regulates fishing, but we have special prohibitions to try to protect these places so that we can use them for a long time. Some of the things that we do is we have a prohibition of extracting gas, oil, and mineral development. And that's the only layer of protection on the West Coast right now, is a National Marine Sanctuary prohibiting that. We have regulations to help protect water quality. So you can't dump in a National Marine Sanctuary. We have a ton of shipping traffic coming into Port of Oakland and also down in LA, and they can't just dump their stuff in National Marine Sanctuaries. We have regulations to help protect wildlife, to help protect species, especially ones that are sensitive and unique and have a really important ecological role. And we also have protections to help protect the seafloor habitat. And you know, a lot of us think of, oh, seafloor, it's just sand. It's actually a ton of life on the seafloor. In my recent expedition down there, there's a ton of different stuff down there, and we have no idea the relationship that we have to some of these things yet. So we don't want to be trashing the seafloor. So these are the regulations that we have to protect these National Marine Sanctuary waters. In terms of how we help protect these areas, we have the Act, which outlines the legal framework for how we operate and what things are allowed or prohibited. We conduct science and monitoring to best understand these areas. These are little hotspots of unique biological systems, so we work with a lot of collaborators to bring in science to focus on these special places. We do a lot of education to help involve communities in becoming problem solvers, to help figure out how can we help sustain our oceans and care about them. So we have a lot of education programming. And resource protection kind of catches things like responding to incidents when an oil spill does happen and tankers collide. We had one in San Francisco Bay a couple years ago, the Costa Busan, leaked oil, it came out the Golden Gate. We respond to that and work with the Coast Guard and other partners and plan for how do we respond to that based on the natural resources in the area at that time, at different times of year, what would we do? There's a lot of planning that goes around how to assess damage and how to prevent further damage. So those are the ways we do the protection that we have outside of the regulations that we have. So here in California, we have 4 places. I should look at this. I keep looking at that. I'm gonna look at this for a while. So here in California, we have 4 national marine sanctuaries protecting just over 13,000 square miles. Started down here in Channel Islands, just a couple of years after their oil spill. They got established around the islands themselves. coast of Santa Barbara. And then in 1981, the Gulf of the Farallones was established, which is just north of San Francisco, and it went up to Bodega Bay. Recently, the Farallones expanded. I'll talk about that a little bit, up to Point Arena. And then the Cordell Bank National Marine Sanctuary was added on as another unique place because all this new information was coming out about what is Cordell Bank and what's unique and valuable about it. And so they brought that on into the sanctuary program as well. And then Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, which is the largest, was established in 1992. And basically, all of these places enjoyed people coming together in communities wanting to further protections. We had that Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and the Coastal Zone Management Act, but people wanted to see more. And all of these places had communities of people, grassroots efforts to help to designate these places. They didn't come out of Washington, D.C. They came from people and communities that cared about the resources they had and maybe can depend on for their livelihood. So, pretty exciting group of places to visit. So our expansions. So recently, we just expanded. The Cordell Bank National Marine Sanctuary used to be about 529 square miles, and the centerpiece of it is Cordell Bank itself. And I'll show you some pictures of what Cordell Bank looks like. It's big, rocky, underwater habitat. And then in 2015, we expanded through a very public process to go a little bit further north, including Bodega Canyon, and then further west. And those are some areas that we just explored to learn about the seafloor. And then the Gulf, that one's better. This is Cordell Bank, and this is a beautiful underwater bank, rocky habitat. We have deep water corals, lots of invertebrates that are really benefiting from all the plankton in the water. And when you have this cold water temperate reef, you attract fishes. We have over 50 species of fish that are known to live around Cordell Bank and thrive there and reproduce there. So the bank was really the centerpiece of the designation of that sanctuary. But the surface waters are also productive and attract those seabirds. This is a black-footed albatross that comes very, very frequently. We have a lot of black-footed albatross around Cordell Bank. And this is a very large predator. We don't think of birds as predators, but they are. They come all the way over, all around the Pacific Ocean to eat mostly on squid. And then the larger ones, the humpback whales, which there's a ton of around right now, they also come up here to eat on all those surface waters. Then the Farallones was 1282 square miles and expanded to over 3,000 square miles. And this truly, both the Cordell Bank and the Farallones expansion was really the community up north in this area from Bodega Bay North saying, what about us? These weren't part of the sanctuary before. And this is actually where the peak upwelling areas are for the coast. And so those communities said, we want to be part of the sanctuary too. We don't want to have oil and gas exploration on this part of the coast. And so it was really the communities that came to know us saying, we want to expand. And so we did a 2-year public process and worked with communities, did our environmental impact statement, came back to the public, got feedback, worked with all the stakeholders, people that make their living in this area, to make sure what we were doing was going to help people. So we expanded in 2014. Just some pictures from the Farallones. They have the coastal shoreline, the rocky intertidal areas. The Farallon Islands are part of Fish and Wildlife Service. They're actually not part of the sanctuary. They're actually a fish and wildlife refuge, but have the largest colony of breeding seabirds in the contiguous United States. So those are common murres. And of course, blue whales and humpback whales. And they have the great honor of being a hotspot for white sharks. So white sharks come to this area because they love to eat the elephant seals, which we have a lot of. Beware of the white shark. So that's some of the historical stuff that happened. But more locally and more recently in California, we passed the California Marine Life Protection Act. Another testament to Californians wanting to protect and preserve the types of things that we have in our ocean ecosystem here. And there were different timelines. They started at the south coast, then they went to the central coast, and they went to the north coast, and then to the north central coast, and designated certain areas for areas where you can't fish. And you can only take certain things, or you can only do recreation in, and each one's a little bit different. And that's in state waters. And state waters are 0 to 3 miles out, whereas our big fisheries management councils manage the federal waters out to 200 miles. So the state has jurisdiction on those state waters 0 to 3 miles out, and created a system of marine protected areas all the way up and down the coast to try to keep the stocks of organisms that we have thriving. And if you have things thriving in these MPAs, they're going to start trickling out so that they can be caught and fished and we can eat them. So pretty incredible stuff for helping to protect the coast and ocean here. But as much as we know about the ocean and know about the types of species that we have here, there's a ton that we don't know, particularly in the deep sea. So I want to take you on a little detour here to the recent expedition I was just on. There's a lot of areas that we don't even know what it looks like. We're protecting it, but we don't even know what the seafloor looks like. A lot of these areas we set aside because of the productivity in the water, and it brings all these whales, and so we assumed, oh, there's got to be interesting stuff on the seafloor, but they were really protected for that oceanography of what's happening in the water. So this year we had a chance to go down and explore the deeper areas of Bodega Canyon, and we went to these two arrows here. We went to Bodega Canyon and another canyon on the continental shelf here. So we dove to around 9,000 feet deep. That was one of our deeper dives. Not with scuba, with remotely operated vehicles. And let's just show you the dive points. We used this thing right here. This is a remotely operated vehicle called Hercules. And the organization we were doing this with was broadcasting through that thin little tether there to the internet so people could watch online. Josh tried watching a little bit. I don't know if anybody else. But it was really cool. While we were exploring and seeing habitat for the very first time, we were streaming it live to the internet so people could watch. And we were also doing telepresence, doing presentations to different museums around the country. And so that's one of the things I did, was talking to people and saying, we found this and we found that, and they'd ask questions, and it was a really, really amazing experience. And so going that deep, and having studied some maps ahead of time, and having done some work in the earlier upper parts of Bodega Canyon, we had no idea exactly what we were going to see, and all of us on the science team were like, it might just be mud. And that would be so boring for everybody. And it turns out there was mud, but there was also a ton of really cool rock. And if you've been to the Grand Canyon and you know what those rocks are like, if you've seen pictures, there was canyon-like habitat like that in Bodega Canyon, of these sheer rock walls and overhangs and ledges. And when you have rocky substrate, just like Cordell Bank, we have it in the deep sea, it makes habitat for other organisms. And so we found a lot of cool things, a lot of deep sea corals. We saw over 16 species of corals that we didn't even know were here on these dives. These are bamboo corals that are here, and those could be a couple hundred years old. They're very slow growing. When they lay down their calcium carbonate base, they're also recording environmental conditions. So they're an incredible specimen to study, and so we're working with scientists at Bodega Marine Lab to actually collect some of these so that they can analyze those bases to reconstruct what our environmental conditions were a couple hundred years ago when these corals first started laying down their coral bases. We also had other invertebrates. That's a nudibranch over there, and then we had a lot of cool purple octopus. Deep sea fish like toadfish and grenadier, and this whip coral, they call it a corkscrew coral. The coral biologist that we had with us from the California Academy of Sciences thinks this might be the first record in North America of this species. So it's really interesting, all these cool things we were finding out. And another type of coral down there. So you see a lot of mud, but as you're exploring, there's so much going on with sea stars and sea cucumbers and fishes, and you start to see all these relationships, and a lot of wonderings came up for me in terms of how do they get food? And a lot of these organisms depend on food that flushes down from the surface waters as marine snow. And so it's a very interconnected ecosystem in the deep sea for things that live on the top waters. And if you don't have a lot of life on the top waters, you're not going to have a lot of life in the deep waters. So pretty cool stuff. Here's another little ledge that showed a lot of invertebrate life underneath. The colors aren't coming out so great. It's pretty neat. So thinking about the incredible things that we have done in California and done nationwide to help protect some of these special places, there's just a lot of things that are happening and changing in the ocean. And right now, our biggest concern is this heat-trapping blanket that we're creating every day around our planet. And when we burn fossil fuels to create energy for powering our cars and our vehicles and powering our laptops and refrigerators and houses, when we burn fossil fuel energy, we create a ton of carbon dioxide. And we have a very excessive addiction right now to carbon dioxide. It's quite rampant and out of control. And what happens is that carbon dioxide gets burned, it gets trapped, and the heat gets trapped from the sun. When the sun comes back out, the sun energy gets trapped in those molecules from the carbon dioxide, and it's really creating a bit of a blanket around our planet. And so that's warming not only the Earth, but also the ocean. The other thing is that carbon dioxide is being absorbed by the ocean, and it always has been. It's been part of the carbon cycle. But with this rampant carbon dioxide, there's a lot of extra carbon dioxide getting absorbed by the ocean, and it's slowly changing the chemistry of the ocean, which is a worry for us about organisms that depend on a specific chemistry. So animals that make shells, they take calcium carbonate out of the water. Calcium carbonate is kind of like chalk, and they're able to extract it out of the water to make their shells. And ocean acidification that's changing the chemistry of the water is making it harder for organisms with shells to make their shells. So there's a lot of studies happening of different types of organisms in different places, in different conditions, to test and see, well, how do they do in a situation like this and like this? And it looks pretty challenging for a lot of the organisms that require this. So things are changing, and you know, I've been with NOAA for 17 years, and I've seen changes in my short time here on this planet. We live in an extremely dynamic ocean ecosystem here, this California current, and so we see a ton of variability that's normal, but we've started to see some things that are not really normal. We have this warm water blob event that we've had, super warm water for about 2 years. There weren't a lot of whales around that year. There weren't a lot of fisheries. We've seen that happen, and then we've also seen these big toxic algal blooms, which really delayed our Dungeness crab fishing season last year. So I've started to see these things in my short little time here. So we have these fisheries, we have warming land, we have pollution, we have this burning of fossil fuels, and it's causing some of these changes in the ocean. We have some zones where there's lower oxygen. We're looking at sea level rise, ocean acidification, algal blooms, a lot of different issues. And so we all really care and want to protect and preserve these places and this ecosystem because we need it. We need it for our survival. And not only Californians, but many people around the world want to help protect and preserve this. And so there's a ton of work that is happening to help to brace ourselves for all these changes. So in national marine sanctuaries, like right here at Cordell Bank and Farallones, we do a lot of science and monitoring. And so we do a lot of surveys at sea that we can compare data from as long as we can go back from the monitoring and changing conditions. We do a lot of water sampling for chemistry. We do this all with partners that are interested in studying these, and we bring them aboard so as much science can happen as possible. Studying the plankton makeup. We have new species of plankton that are starting to appear that typically were further south, and now they're more here. And what does that mean for the food web? We have a buoy out in the Cordell Bank Sanctuary monitoring hypoxia, because that's an area of what we're very concerned about. When there's low oxygen in the water, it means there's no oxygen for fish or for crabs. And so that's an area that we're studying. And then with the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary, we have the Ocean Climate Center, which is based on Crissy Field, and they're working to bring together all the collaborators that are working on these issues to try to work together to create solutions to adapt to the changes that we're seeing in the ocean. And so that's how some of the national marine sanctuaries are working to help with all this change. So luckily, we live in California, and California, again, is leading the way for helping to address these changes and tackling it head on. We passed AB 32 some years ago to work as a state to reduce our emissions to pre-1990 levels, and I predict that we'll probably make that even further down the line. And Sonoma County, where we live, where Sonoma State University is really taking a leading role for our area. With AB 32, regional climate protection authorities were set up so that regions could work on what makes sense for them based on their community and their transportation and their infrastructure to set goals to reduce carbon emissions. Because ultimately, a lot of all these problems come down to we need to reduce our CO2. And so we're tackling it in small pods all around the world. In California, we're doing it through these regional climate protection authorities to create recommendations and laws to reduce our carbon footprint. The Center for Climate Protection is a nonprofit based in Santa Rosa, and they work with people to help implement these things. And already, through the work that's happened through AB 32, Sonoma County has reduced its emissions by 11%. And tons of money has been saved in terms of paying for power and electricity through these alternative, I forgot the name of it, clean energy conglomerates where you can purchase energy that's created in renewable manners like solar. And so there's a lot of changes afoot right here. here. Sonoma County is kind of right on the edge of helping to be a problem solver, which is pretty exciting for being here in this moment and being a part of these changes that are happening. So ultimately, it does come back to us in terms of the WAR Act. They really meant it when we talk about nothing's going to change unless we get involved. And sometimes we think, oh, someone else is going to do it. But really, now more than ever, I'm seeing how powerful it is for people, everybody, no matter what age, to be involved in sharing what you're passionate about, sharing what you think is important. And we really need to be part of that in order to keep this blue planet spinning and producing oxygen for us. So we did it. 20 minutes left. So I'm happy to take some questions about any of the stuff that I talked about here. Okay.
Do you work with Point Reyes National Park, the beaches there? Because I did a snowy plover dosing thing there, so do you?
Yeah, so our office, we're co-located at Point Reyes National Seashore for our offices, and I work a lot with the Point Reyes National Seashore, specifically with interpretation and education. So we have a couple facilities out there. We have a really great center out at the Point Reyes Lighthouse that really shares some of the habitats that you saw today so people can see what's under the water. A lot of people come out to Point Reyes and they get these gorgeous views and they wonder, well, what's under the water? So we did a little visitor center out at the lighthouse with them on that. And I helped train the docents that are doing a lot of monitoring and stuff. So they're a really important partner. Yeah.
What effects, if any, has the current administration had on your, either personally or work with your association does?
Yeah. So we are a federal government agency. National Marine Sanctuaries is part of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And so our budget is dependent on what Congress passes for a budget. And so luckily, Congress has really supported sanctuaries a bit in the past, and we've survived this first fiscal year pretty well. Hard to say what's going to happen next year. I was really impressed to see our California legislators are extremely supportive of National Marine Sanctuaries. They just had a forum last week down in Sausalito, bringing together Nancy Pelosi and Jared Huffman and Jackie Speer and some other speakers, and they talked about how they really want to help protect national marine sanctuaries. There was an executive order out to examine the boundaries of national marine sanctuaries and extracting energy out of them, meaning oil. And that was a big public comment period where we had over 100,000 comments come in to help with that, because the public participates in that. And we have to kind of wait and stand by and see. So it is a little interesting time right now. Definitely more interesting than I've ever seen in my time here. And strangely enough, so when this all started happening, I got a little nervous and scared. And I've also found it to be an amazing opportunity to really keep educating and talking to more people. And it's given me a ton of motivation to really keep working at doing education outreach to share what we have here with more and more people, which has given me a bit of jolt of energy personally as a professional educator. So I'm trying to turn it around to do the best good with what we have at this point. So that's where I'm at personally. And that recent research cruise was pretty exciting because it gave us a lot of, we don't even know half of our sanctuary. This is all new to us, all these new habitats. And for me, I'm the education person, so I'm just like, wow, there's all this new stuff to be talking about and learning about and sharing with people. So for me, I've just been feeling the motivation to do an even better job with the resources that we do.
What are some of the more shocking changes you've seen with the wildlife and animal life through your career?
I would say some of them I wonder about being a normal dynamic versus some of how is it a shocking event? I think the warm water blob was a big one, which was 2 years ago. There was just this big warm water mass that stuck around all the way up to Alaska. And bizarre things were happening, meaning we were seeing bottlenose dolphins here, typically Southern California species. There were ocean sunfish that were being seen in Alaska. They don't typically go that far north. That was a really interesting year, and it was kind of shocking to see. This is not normal. This is way out of our normal cycle, and that was kind of a warning of, yeah, things are changing. And also the toxic algal bloom that we had was a big widespread event. And I think underscored to me how big this system is, and we can't control everything as humans. The best thing we can do is reduce our impact on the ocean. And seeing that, how the impact of that really hurt communities of people, people that fish for Dungeness crab and restaurants that depend on selling Dungeness crab all hurt financially because of that toxic algal. So that was another aha moment for me that was kind of shocking. The other one that I'm seeing, which isn't really related to climate change so much, is that we have an amazing amount of whales that visit this region to feed because of the productive food we have, but we also have a very busy commercial shipping port. And we've seen a lot of whale ship strikes and dead whales washing up on the beach with blunt trauma on them, and that's pretty shocking to see. These ships do not want to hit whales, but they happen to be in the area, and we're working together actually with this industry to figure out how can we slow these ships down, because these whales are not going to move out of the way. If they're feeding, they're feeding. So that to me is sort of shocking, because they're these giant mammals and they have incredible life history, and then getting hit by ships is pretty traumatic to see. So those are some of the things I've seen. Okay, another one is the rise of plastics in the ocean. And from when we were kids, when I was a kid, plastic was like on the rise. Everything's single-use disposable. And a lot of it is in the ocean right now. And we're still in the single-use disposable society that is really hard for the ocean. And so another shocking thing to me is seeing how many animals are eating plastic and dying from it. So, yeah. Okay, better stop me now before I think of another one.
Talking about like the plastic and stuff, I know like recently, cause I'm from SoCal, and so like for the past 2 years, you know, we have to pay for plastic now. Like, do you know like if that has made a huge impact, like so far, like the law, like has it reduced plastic in the ocean?
That's a really great question, and I think it's hard to quantify that yet,
Right.
but it's the start of a movement, hopefully, to look at plastic as a valuable commodity, and that we really value this thing that helps our lives so much, so we should attach a value to it. If we need a plastic bag that badly, we should attach a value to it. So I think it's changing the relationship with plastic, and it's in our lives. We need plastic for many things, but I think we need to reshape our relationship with plastic overall to be something that we would actually pay for. We need it, so we have to pay for it. So I don't think it's had an effect yet, but I think it's the beginning of a movement that will reduce plastic over time. I've seen areas that have had plastic bag bans, less plastic bags running around. But we did see plastic bags and plastic water bottles in Bodega Canyon, 9,000 feet on the seafloor. So there is no way that stuff goes somewhere. We saw it on the seafloor. The other one is the microbeads ban, that some companies are going to phase out the use of plastic microbeads, which they use in cosmetics and face washes and toothpastes. So some companies are stepping up to ban that, and some states are banning it, and it's just the beginning, hopefully, of a swell to slowly move to different sources. And I think an amazing opportunity for engineering to find solutions for all these things in terms of careers and jobs, and looking at the biomedical industry and how do we stop using plastics and stuff that we don't need to. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
What kinds of methods are there for cleaning plastics out of the ocean?
I'm glad you asked that question, because there's one thing that's gotten a lot of news attention in terms of going out there and cleaning up like a vacuum cleaner. And the problem is we have to cut off the source. It's like a stream of plastic that's continually coming in. And some of it's from poor containment on land, some of it's just careless. How many of you have seen a piece of plastic on the ground? Come on, all your hands should be up. There's trash on the ground all the time. All that stuff eventually moves to a stream, to a river, out to the ocean. And in some places it's a little bit more precarious, and it could be garbage cans that don't have the right lids on it, and the birds get in and it starts coming all out. I've seen that happen a lot of places too. So in terms of cleaning it up, it's stopping it from going in. It's just like smoking. You're not gonna get better if you don't stop smoking. You can't keep smoking and then think you're gonna get better. You have to stop the input. So that's my thought on that. And working with a lot of these organizations that are working on plastics, that's the thought across the board. You gotta stop putting this stuff in the ocean. So coming up with creative ways to start coming up with alternative products, and coming up with ways to reuse them, and ways to keep them out of the waterways. And then eventually, since the ocean's moving around and swirling, we can clean up. Definitely all these beach cleanups are hugely helpful, really, really important, especially the creek ones that prevent it from getting in the ocean, because it gets it out of the system. And it also raises our awareness when we're out there and collecting all these different things. We're all a little bit more aware of the impact on the ocean. So I definitely think beach cleanups are hugely helpful, but we really, really need to cut it off at the source and stop it from going into the ocean. And that's easier said than done in some places. Like, there's some countries in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, they have no ways to recycle. And they are stuck in this society where they have all this plastic coming in and it's just left on the beach or stuff like that. So that's my pitch. Reusable water bottle number 1. Any questions?
Yeah, you said California is kind of like leading the cause as far as protecting the coast. Are there any other states or countries that sort of model our tactics or are close to our cultural, significance of protecting the ocean? Like, where else in the world does it matter?
That is a great question. I don't think I could speak to that very educated. I'm not so sure. I don't know. That's not an area of study of mine, so I can't really say. I think Oregon and Washington are also very big into their coast and ocean in terms of protections and laws that they've passed. I'm not so familiar with the East Coast in terms of laws. I mean, when I grew up on Long Island, you had to get a pass from your town to show that you're a resident to go to your beach. Which meant if you went to another town, you couldn't go to that beach. And now that I live in California, that boggles my mind. And it made me realize how lucky we are to have that culture that we pass laws so that you can all go to any beach you want. Which to me was pretty
Is
significant.
that law still in effect, like in Long Island?
Oh yeah,
Really?
oh yeah. I can't go to the beach that I grew up in anymore because I don't live there.
And I don't think that's silly.
Yeah. So that's interesting to compare. But